We've already talked about the role of Cuomo and his Moreland Commission in addressing or not addressing political corruption. This week, we're going to talk both about state legislatures in general and look more closely at political corruption through that lens. You're probably familiar with these important but well-known functions of legislatures. Unless you've done our state government internship, which I recommend you consider, unless you've done that, you may be less familiar with constituent service. Every legislator's office has somebody in charge of taking requests from constituents, that is, voters who live in her district, for intervention or help when some aspect of the state bureaucracy is not functioning correctly. The positive is that there's someone who has an incentive to help when that happens. The downside is that no one in the legislature has any incentive to try and streamline the bureaucracy so it works better, since they assume that constituents that are helped will be more likely to vote for the re-election of that legislator. Like most states, New York has two houses to its legislature. For most of New York State's history, we allocated senators by county. But in a 1964 case, the Supreme Court struck down that system on the grounds that it violated democracy's central principle: one person, one vote. The irony, of course, is that on the federal level, the U.S. Senate is still allocated two per state, irrespective of the population of that state.
Corruption's such an old song that we can sing along in harmony, and nowhere is it stronger than in Albany.
Is New York government really the most corrupt in the United States? These are just some of the higher profile scandals in New York politics over the last 12 or 15 years.
Such an old song that we can sing along in harmony, and nowhere is it stronger than in Albany.
So is this headline right? Ranked by the simple measure of the number of corruption convictions of state politicians, New York is the worst in the union. However, if we prorate that for population or rate our ethics laws, we still come out poorly, but not quite as bad. The level of corruption in every U.S. state is too high to be acceptable. The most recent rankings from the Center for Public Integrity, no state got better than a C grade, and only 3 states got better than a D+. This slightly more recent study put New York closer to the bottom. Another virtue of this Institute for Corruption Studies, it reminds us that a large part of the problem is that much of what ordinary citizens would consider corruption is technically legal. One thing is indisputable. The level of corruption in New York State government is high enough to necessitate our attempting to fix it. And the level of corruption in pretty much every U.S. state is worse than that of the federal government, even worse than that of the federal government. Sometimes people use the term corruption for anything they don't like about politics, but let's be really specific. Let's start with a definition. I'm going to propose that we view political corruption as using the power of a political office for personal gain. Notice that there are some behaviors which might cause scandal if performed by a politician that wouldn't be included. Having an extramarital affair, whatever you may think about it, would not be considered political corruption. Using campaign funds or political connections to hush it up would be. There are actions a state legislature might take that are legal, yet might advance their careers rather than the public interest. This definition would imply that there could even be forms of legal corruption. According to the U.S. Supreme Court, as long as there is no quid pro quo, as long as there is no explicit I will give you this if you do this for me, there is no illegality. So it's completely legal to vote a certain way on the expectation of getting campaign donations as long as there has been no explicit quid pro quo agreement. You can judge yourself whether that should be considered corruption or just good government. In the next video, we'll look at causes and possible solutions.